Hello out there and welcome to a new edition of GeoPortfolio. This is your weekly show that gives you all the geopolitical news and analysis relevant to your portfolio. As usual, I'm your host. My name is Mikkel Rosenvold. I'm the partner of geopolitics here at Steno Research. And with me once again, I have you, Anne, live from Paris. How are things
Hello, it's
down
good
there?
to be back. It's good to be back
Great.
after a little hiatus.
Absolutely. It's really good to have you back, Anne. I know it seems like there are a lot of exams on your school in Paris, probably more than here in Copenhagen. I don't know if they're a little more old school, but you're really getting tested, I think, down there. Is that true?
Yeah, old school's probably the right way to put it. Handwritten exams. It's not something we do a whole lot anymore in Denmark, but it's good to get the practice in. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
been intense, especially with the protests. So I had an exam on Tuesday morning, and we had to wait for full-on riot police to come in and kick
Wow.
protesters out who were blocking the entrance to the exam room with containers and like city bikes and whatnot. It was a pretty surreal experience, frankly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and not even being recognized how surreal that experience was. They were just like, go ahead, and then the doors were reopened, and you just like go ahead and do your exam now. So
just to get
surreal
this
scenes.
just to get this right, and I think this has been the talk of the town in Copenhagen as well. It's been sort of a tent camp. I don't know if you would call it that. Just outside the University of Copenhagen. It's been very, very peaceful, but still huge news in Denmark. But obviously things are a little more active in France. They're a little more used to politics on the streets, I suppose. So as you said, the riot police simply forced their way so you could go to an exam.
Handcuffed some people and kicked the
Wow.
rest out. It's pretty severe.
But I mean, and this goes to show the impetus and sort of the feelings that the Israel-Hamas conflict has awoken in Western populations. It seems like it's the one cause that's really mobilizing, especially the left wing right now. It's really drawing out emotions in people all across the Western Hemisphere. Um, so let's dive a little bit into that conflict. There's no way around it, and let's just go down there, and then we'll sort of uh, put a perspective on the Western view and things afterwards. But basically, what we had this weekend, over the weekend, Israel launched its offensive against Rafah, the last remaining stronghold. We'll get back to that. But then on Monday, Hamas accepted a truce offer. Now, I've been talking about this truce offer last week as well. It seems like at least the Americans, the Qataris, the Egyptians believed that this truce offer was with Israel's blessing, so that once Hamas accepted it, we would have a truce. But that's not the case, is it? I'm not quite sure if the Israelis changed their mind over the weekend, perhaps due to the rockets being sent out of Rafah. If Israel feels that Hamas stalled this for too long, or if the Israelis simply thought, now we've begun the Rafah offensive, we can't really turn around. Obviously, the protesters in Paris, in Copenhagen, I think, Anne, I'd like your view on that, will probably see this as another evidence of Israel's lack of willingness to cut a deal and to make peace here.
Yes, especially when it was immediately followed up with the notice that refugees should leave Rafah, which for long have been the only sanctuary
Mm.
left, essentially. Um, but yeah, the official statement coming out of the Netanyahu government is that the demands of the Hamas side was simply too far fetched. Yeah, what's your view on that?
I
Is
mean,
that the
it's
truthfully the reason, or what do you think?
I think there are many aspects to this. First and foremost, I think the Israelis have been negotiating somewhat half-hearted in the current negotiations. They obviously haven't been fully behind these truce proposals. Perhaps they feel that Hamas only accepted some parts of it. It was reported that this offer that was in front of Hamas was very generous on the Israeli side. Perhaps the Israeli government wasn't entirely on board with that. And then perhaps I think over the weekend, the Israelis simply lost patience when they started being on the receiving end of rocket attacks out of Rafah. So I think, and then perhaps, I don't know this, but it could be that Hamas, once they felt that Israel was moving to attack Rafah, they thought this is exactly the right time to accept a truce proposal, once again painting Israel as the aggressors. There are some PR strategies to that as well. So I think all in all, this points at two sides to this conflict who are not really that interested in peace. I mean, if they were really desperate to make peace, it seems like they should have done a deal by now. I know there are remaining issues with hostages, etc., but it seems like at least a temporary truce should be an achievable target for both sides, but we're not there yet. Let's just have a little look at the map as well, just to point out what we're looking at. I'll just move a little bit to the side so people can see here. Basically, the Rafah crossing is the last remaining crossing out of the Gaza Strip. It's on the border with Egypt, but Egypt is obviously very, very reluctant to let in any hostages. And the latest report is that Israel is blocking a lot of the aid coming from the north and northeast. So a very, very difficult situation here in Gaza. I'm going to stop guessing on when we're going to see peace down here. I've been wrong too many times on this. I thought that Hamas accepting this truce proposal would be it this week, but apparently not. I think now that the Israelis have started their Rafah offensive, it's going to be very hard for them to turn around quickly. So things are not looking too good, I have to admit. We're probably looking at extended protests in the West. And
yes,
I think,
yeah,
and
about
even
that. If I can ask you one question, obviously being so close to the protests going on around here, is how big is the divergence between popular opinion now in Europe, in countries like France and Denmark? These student protests have been getting a lot of media attention, and at least some of their purpose is obviously to kind of shed light on the population is more critical of Israel than governments are. Is that the true reading of this, or is the protesters more of a centralized, more as how do you say a smaller group, not truly representative of the population, the popular opinion?
well, the polls we are seeing clearly shows that both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side are dropping in support in the West. So I don't think this is a mobilization to support Hamas, but this is very clearly the movement is very clear that Israel is eroding its support in the West, both among the population, but then eventually also within the governments. There's still large parts of Western countries who are more or less supportive of Israel, but the things Israel are doing down there, and we won't get into discussions on what's fair and what's right. Let's just look at the facts. Israel's support in the West is fading slowly. And you can see that in the US as well. The Biden administration is very clearly getting fed up with the Netanyahu administration. They're still, of course, supporting Israel. It's a strategic partner for the US, but they are beginning to withhold deliveries of missiles and weaponry to Israel. They are putting as much pressure as they can on Israel to reach some sort of peace agreement so that they can get on with things, get on to more important matters than this. The future of Gaza, the future of the Middle East as a whole. So the pressure is growing on Israel. And I think perhaps that will lead and is leading to the Netanyahu administration, Israeli politics becoming more isolated and more a question of we can only defend Israel ourselves. We cannot rely on the West anymore. And that is a dangerous development because it forces Israel to be more aggressive and to listen less perhaps to the West and the US in the future. So very, very interesting development long term this. I think Hamas is playing the long game here. Their main objective is not to rescue civilian lives or to protect the population in Gaza. Their mission in this war is to put the Palestinian cause back at the forefront of Arab country politics. And they've managed to do so far. And of course, the incentive is there for them as well. Once they end this conflict, the Palestinian cause is going to fall in relevance again, and we're going to return to talking about normalization, oil prices, etc., as we did last week as well in this show. So, some grim outlooks. I'm very much in doubt over when this will all end. But obviously, we'll keep an eye on it since it has huge impact on markets. We can see that whenever we have developments down here. So, and before we end, I want to skip to something completely else. This guy, or these guys, Xi Jinping has been on a European tour. He hosted Olaf Scholz in
2 weeks ago,
last
yeah.
week. Yeah, 2 weeks ago it was. And now he visited Europe for a tour where he, of course, went to the Élysée Palais to visit Emmanuel Macron, right in your backyard, Alde. And how do you
Yes.
view this? Macron positioning himself in the forefront of geopolitics as well?
Well, that's not news in its own. Yes, so Xi Jinping has just initiated a Europe tour with aside from France, also includes Serbia and Hungary. Um, putting in that company of Serbia and Hungary, I don't know how the French should feel. So Serbia and Hungary is obviously the main allies, European allies of China in Europe. So to put France to put themselves in that company, I think they're trying to counterbalance that by inviting Ursula von der Leyen, the European president of the Commission, to join. So they are not put exactly in the same camp as those other countries. But it certainly is evidence to China feeling that France has been more friendly minded or neutral compared to the US, let's say. Macron have had those quite controversial statements in the past that Europe shouldn't just be another puppet of the US, essentially, when it comes to US China in relations, and they should have, let's say, a mind of its own, a plan of its own. So this is a classic example of red carpet diplomacy, I say. The main point of this is just to have some nice pictures. I think yesterday they were in southern France, which was supposed to be a bit more informal. I think, unfortunately, the weather was really poor, so they didn't manage to get those really buddy photo op sessions. But that's the main point of it. Also, obviously, discussing Ukraine, Taiwan, and some ongoing probes on both sides, both in France and in China, into subsidies both ways being dumped. So China is very unhappy with what they call the cognac probe, that France apparently been dumping cheap cognac into the Chinese market, which is likely more of a tit for tat retaliation move against France, who have been looking into China dumping cheap EVs, for example, into the French market. Yeah. So that's a
Absolutely.
quick summary of what's going on.
I agree completely, and this is it's always interesting when we see these world leaders to the stage, especially Xi Jinping with the impetus he has. This is a major European event now. It wouldn't have been 10 or 15 years ago. I think what we're seeing is sort of a double game. I think for Macron and for the West, this is very much about trying to see if Xi Jinping can be moved on the Ukraine topic. She is expected to have a meeting with Putin in next month, probably in Beijing, and they're hoping that he can somehow put the screws on Putin or push Putin towards a negotiated end to this conflict.
They're quite far from each other right now.
Absolutely. So,
yeah.
so I think the Europeans, Macron and obviously US, is trying somehow to drive a wedge in between China and Russia. At the same time, I think she is looking at Europe as is looking to drive a wedge in between the US and Europe, not on Ukraine, that's impossible, but possibly on trade, because I think China is slowly realizing that there's an end date to their export adventures on the US market. The US markets are slowly being closed to Chinese goods, especially in strategic areas. But Europe is still very much open. And Europe is very much open to cheap Chinese goods, as we're seeing at the moment, especially in the EV space, as you mentioned, but also in electronics, clothing, everything else. After a couple of years of high inflation, there's a huge demand for cheaper goods, which China can provide and which is really aiding the Chinese economy at the moment. So I think both parties are sort of trying to play the game that can China divide Europe from the US? Can the West divide China from Russia? That's going to be the game over the coming months with Ukraine and trade, two of the most important battlefields. Yes, Anne?
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And there are danger signs ahead for China. Like the
Mm.
US have obviously big leverage. We saw recently with the ASML, the Dutch lithography company, which is very important for advanced chip manufacturing in China, where the US were able to use its leverage to make Holland kind of restrict access to those type of high end equipment. So there's dangers ahead for China, but obviously not to the extent that the sour US China relations right now.
Absolutely. So, and that's all for this week. It was great having you on the GeoPortfolio as well. As usual, you can read all our content on stenoresearch.com. And as something new, and you have joined our very new gamble, the macroticket.com. It's a free website where we cover everything macroeconomic and geopolitical. You've been starting writing pieces in there, so keep an eye out for macroticket.com. You'll find a link in the description. It's a completely free news website. So check out Ants and myself, all our pieces in there and on stenoresearch.com. And then I guess we'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in, Anne.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for listening out there. We'll see you next week.